world. We are live. Welcome to the February 2025 edition of the Laravel Worldwide Meetup. My name is Dan Sapelsa. I'm a developer at Vehicle. I'm one of your co-hosts, along with Margaret Tavares, and we're once again thrilled to bring you another great talk from a member of the Laravel community. Margaret, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty great, Dan. How about yourself?
Doing well, thank you. It's been a pretty harsh winter here in southwestern Ontario, but seeing the first signs of spring. Hopefully, fingers crossed today. But nonetheless, whatever the weather's doing out there, I'm excited about today's talk. It's been a big week, a big week in Laravel land, maybe the biggest in Laravel history. So yeah, we're definitely very excited to have a Laravel core team member here, Joe Dixon, to join us today and chat about that. So looking forward to that. But before we do that, Margaret, we've got a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. So yeah, let's have a look here. What do we got?
Of course. So some Laravel staples, if you have not heard about them yet, there is a wonderful resource, which is Laravel News, ran by the awesome Eric Barnes. So they have a weekly email newsletter. You can check them out at laravel-news.com. And they also have a podcast ran by Jake Bennett and Michael Drinda, two wonderful people, where you can check out all the latest Laravel releases in the community from the last week, including Laravel 12, some tutorials and happenings in the Laravel community. So you can check them out. Laravel Podcast is another wonderful resource hosted by the wonderful Matt Stover. So in their latest episode, he's joined by Chris Sev, who is the new Director of Developer Relations at Laravel. So if you would like to learn more, you can check out that episode on laravelpodcast.com. LaraJobs is another wonderful resource. So if you're looking to hire, looking to post a job, and for all your Laravel job needs, you can check them out at larajobs.com. This month, what we wanted to do is feature some job posts from some companies in the community. So if you want to take a look at Prompt Therapy Solutions, Adarim, and Insomnia Cookies, they'll have some information in the description box below, so you can check out those links if you're interested in working with them. As for another wonderful resource, you can check out Laracast. So big thank you to Jeffrey Way for running this awesome resource for anyone looking to build their Laravel skills. So please check them out if you want to learn some Laravel. Some upcoming events that are happening in the community. So in a couple weeks, actually, there's Laracon India. So you can check them out at laracon.in. There's tickets that are still available, and that's going to be happening in Ahmedabad, India. And yeah, such a great event. And then another event that just got announced is Laracon US. So that's going to be happening in Denver, Colorado, USA. And it's going to be happening the end of July, on July 29th and 30th. And you can check them out at laracon.us. And the tickets are now available to purchase. So for the global community, you can also check out the GTA PHP user group. In short, that's the Greater Toronto area. They're a Toronto meetup group. They're a hybrid meetup group. So if you'd like to learn and meet a talented group of PHP developers online, you can check them out at meetup.com. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Vehicle. So they're our host and helping to support and relaunching the meetup. They have a great team of developers. So if you do have a Laravel problem, they'd be happy to help you out. So make sure to hit them up at go@vehicle.com or vehicle.com. We also have a giveaway, so big thank you to our sponsor, JetBrains. They're going to be giving away a couple of one-year subscription codes to any JetBrains IDE this month. So winners will receive an email from our community manager, and we have it running now from now until March 4th. And now I'm going to pass it off to Dan to introduce our guest this month.
We'll show the QR code again at the end. Thank you, Margaret. Once again, our speaker this month is Joe Dixon. Joe is a Laravel core team member. Joe gave one of my favorite live demos last summer at Laracon US, where he was able to power a drone remotely using Laravel Reverb. And we're really excited that Joe's joining us today because, as we said, this has been probably the biggest week in Laracon history. Yesterday, the launch of Laravel Cloud that we're all so excited about. And Joe's gracious enough to join us today and share some insights on what it was like to be involved in building that platform. How you doing today, Joe?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yes, we're
joining us.
Thrilled to have you. The timing is perfect. There's a lot of buzz in the community about the launch of Laravel Cloud just yesterday. So great to have you here and be able to hear some war stories of what it was all about, what it was like to help launch the platform. So cool. All right. So I think, Joe, if you have some slides or something you'd like to show there, so if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we'll hand off to you. Margaret and I will step backstage and we'll hear what you have to say, and then maybe we'll chat a little bit after.
Sure. Let me just get things teed up.
All right.
So I'm going to share.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. I see the slides. So Margaret and I will step backstage. The stage is yours, Joe, and we'll chat soon. All right.
Awesome.
Good luck, Joe.
Thanks. All right, hey everybody. Thank you for tuning in, listening to the show today. Yeah, I'm Joe Dixon, engineering team lead for Laravel Cloud, and today we're going to be talking about building Laravel Cloud and giving you guys a peek behind the curtain of Laravel Cloud, some of the decisions we made along the way, how it works. Going to answer some of your questions that that you were kind enough to share with me in advance. But let's get right into it. If my slides will work. Here we go. Okay, so just to settle things in, I'm going to talk a little bit about me just for a couple of minutes, so bear with me. Like I said, my name is Joe Dixon. I live with my wife and 2 small kids. That's me on the left, in case you couldn't tell, in a small city in the UK called Norwich, where we're lucky enough to have 2 cathedrals, 1 castle, and the best football team in the world, Norwich City. Outside of work time, when I'm not watching football, I really enjoy watching Formula 1. And I drink a lot of coffee. I'm a bit of a coffee nerd. I got a nice espresso machine. And so, yeah, I'm making coffee multiple times a day to take a break from the screen. Okay, so let's talk. That's enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about Laravel Cloud. We will jump into a demo, but let's first take a step back and just talk a little bit about what Laravel Cloud is. Now, I'm sure if you've been monitoring any social channels over the last few days, you've probably good chance you're already aware what Laravel Cloud is. But just in case, Cloud is a fully managed platform for deploying your Laravel applications. It's built to scale. It has baked-in support for things like databases and caches, and it really is the fastest way to deploy your Laravel applications. It's fully managed, so you don't need any server providers. We handle all of the infrastructure for you, and it will auto scale and scale up and down to meet the demands of your application. But that's probably enough of me talking about that for now. Let's let the product speak for itself. So let's go and jump in, and I'm going to give you a short demo of Laravel Cloud. Okay, so I'm in here in a brand new, this is the cloud dashboard. I'm in here with a brand new organization created. I have no applications or anything set up in here. I have no source control providers connected. And we're just going to take a look and see how quick and easy it is to deploy a vanilla Laravel application. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a new application. And I don't have, like I said, any source control providers connected at all. So I'm going to go ahead and connect my GitHub account. It's going to redirect me off to GitHub, and I want this time for full send organization. I'm going to click on this, and I can now choose if I want to import all my repos or I want to select an individual one. So I've created one in advance of the meetup called WW Meetup, and I'm just going to connect this one. I'm going to click install and authorize, and I'll get redirected back to cloud with that repository now able to select. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And my application name is already pre-populated for me. I can go ahead and click New Application. So this is just a brand new vanilla Laravel application, which I Laravel newed up in the build up to the talk and pushed up literally 10 minutes beforehand. So it's nothing exciting about it. It's just a bare vanilla application. But what's pretty cool is that's all I have to do. I can now just go here and hit the deploy button, and it's going to go ahead and deploy my application. And it happens in 2 parts. So the first thing that's going to happen is, as you can see, it's building my application. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit further into the talk, but Laravel Cloud is built on top of Kubernetes. So at this build phase, it's literally creating, it's zipping up, it's taking my application, it's pulling it down from Git, and it's baking it into a Docker image for me. It's then going to deploy that image into Kubernetes. And you can see that in just 25 short seconds, my Laravel application has now been deployed. And if I jump over here into the environment, you can see that I'm automatically generated this Laravel Cloud domain. So any application will have access to one of these immediately. So you can just click on this and you should be taken, you can see, to my brand new Laravel 12 splash screen. So in just, less than a minute, I've had my application connected from GitHub. I've hit the deploy button, and it's now live, ready, accessible on the internet. Okay, but that's not all. So we can do more here. You can see in this environment overview screen that we've got here, that we affectionately call internally the canvas, you can see that we have got an overview of our application at this point. So you can see that I've got my edge network configured here, which tells me I've got things like denial of service protection enabled. I've got CDN enabled, and I've got edge caching enabled. You can see here that I've got my vanity, or sorry, my cloud domain accessible here. And I can go ahead and add any custom domains that I would like. I can configure my actual compute environment here. So you can see I've just got one app instance here, which is serving my web traffic. But I can go ahead and add a worker cluster. So if I want a completely separate instance to serve or to process my, for instance, queue jobs, I can go ahead and create one in here. I can also edit my existing app cluster. So I can go ahead in here and click the edit button, and inside here you can see that I can do things like change the size of my cluster, and I can change the scale that it runs at. So in here I can say at the moment it's only ever going to run one with one replica, but if I want to scale that up so that I know I'm going to be dealing with, or likely to be dealing with, spiky traffic, I can say I want to scale that up between 1 and 5 replicas. Or I know that I'm dealing with a consistent amount of traffic and I just want to go specifically and always have 5 replicas of this particular size running at any given time. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, no, sorry. I'm just going to talk about this as well. So we also have this concept of hibernation. So if you have applications which don't serve huge amounts of traffic, or they are in your development environment and you don't want to be paying for compute the entire time, you can just go in here and enable hibernation and choose how long you would like your application to hibernate after. And basically what this is going to do is after that amount of time has elapsed and your environment has not received any HTTP requests, it's going to go ahead and basically power that environment down. And so you are no longer charged for compute. But as soon as somebody makes a request to your application, it will automatically come back to life with about 5 to 10 seconds delay for that first initial request, but it will come back to life and you'll be charged for compute again at that point until you've served all the traffic that you need, and that time elapses again, and it will continue. It will go back down, power back down, and hibernate. So this is a really nice feature that we have to allow you to save on costs. And you can see you can do things here like enable your Laravel's internal scheduler and do things like enable Octane as a runtime. And I mentioned you can create a completely different worker cluster over here if you want to keep your queue jobs separate, or any other background processes you want to run separately, you can go ahead and do that. But if you have an application that's small enough that you would like to run this all on one app cluster, so just this app cluster that you can see up here, you can go ahead and add your background processes directly here as well. So I can go ahead here and create a queue worker, for instance. And this is all pre-configured to work out the box. So in most cases, you may just be able to come in here, click create background process, save this, and you will automatically have your queue worker running as soon as you run your next deployment. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and reset this. But the one last thing I'd like to show you is databases. So when Taylor announced that we would be launching cloud at Laracon EU just a couple of weeks ago, we were at the stage where we thought we would only have access to MySQL a couple of weeks after release. But as a little surprise, we actually have MySQL available now in kind of developer preview mode. So if I select this here, you can see that we are still buttoning up things on MySQL, but it is available and ready for you to use. So we're pretty excited about that, and we'd love your feedback. If you do use MySQL, let us know how things go for you. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and create a serverless Postgres database. And this is a really nice database option because it does something similar to our app compute, which allows you to hibernate your database if it's not processing any queries. So again, I can choose the scale that I want my database to run at, and I can choose after how long I want it to hibernate. So I'm just going to stick with the defaults here and click save. I'm going to create a new database cluster. And you should see we have a little toast pop up here that tells us that this database is now creating. And I can't deploy this application yet until the database is created. But the really nice thing is these things provision super quickly. So you can see that within, I don't know, what was that, 5 seconds, that database is now provisioned and ready to use. So I can go ahead here and click save, or I can immediately save and deploy those changes. But for now, I'm just going to click save because I want to show you one cool thing that happened when I did that. So we're going to go ahead and save, and I'm going to jump into my environment settings. And I'm going to scroll down here and do something that nobody should ever do on a stream, but I'm going to delete this database immediately afterwards. And I'm going to show you what Cloud is doing behind the scenes when you create that database. By revealing those secrets, you can see that it's automatically created or automatically injected all of the relevant environment variables needed to connect that database to your application. So the next time you deploy, these will get injected into your runtime, and you will automatically have a database connection. I'm going to scroll, and hopefully nobody stole that in time. The other nice thing that happens when I create a database is, prior to this change of me creating a database, I probably should have shown you this beforehand, but this line in the deploy commands was actually commented out. But when we recognize that a database has been attached, we will automatically uncomment that. And so the next time that you run your deployment, the migrations will automatically run. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to jump over to deployments and hit deploy. And if we watch the deployment output a little more closely this time, we should look in the running deploy commands. When we get to that stage, you should see that those database migrations do indeed run. Let's just give that a second to process. I'm going to take a drink. Okay, so you can see that the database migrations did indeed run. And so we now have a database attached to our application in, again, a very short space of time. And even with running those migrations, that deployment still ran in 28 seconds, which I think is pretty wild. Okay, so that was a short whistle-stop tour of Cloud. There are many more things that Cloud can do. You can see that we have things like artisan commands that you can run directly from the UI. We have logs, so things like application logs and access logs you can see in here. We have a metrics panel, so you can see the number of requests that are being processed. You can see how your CPU and memory are performing for your application. And then I jumped into settings, so you can see again that we have things like you're able to switch out your Git branch. We have things like push to deploy, which you can turn on and off. It's turned on by default, so anytime you push to the connected branch of your application, you will automatically deploy every time you push to that branch. You can choose your PHP version, your Node version. You can choose things like HTTP timeouts and graceful shutdown timeouts. These are all like one-click changes that will be reflected in your next deployment. So if you imagine you're going through the process of working on an application and upgrading it for a major PHP version update, you can go ahead and do all that locally. And then all you have to do when you're ready to switch that out is switch the version of PHP in this dropdown, redeploy your application, and everything just works. So there's no need to worry about version upgrades. We take all of that, and we take care of all of that for you. Okay. All right, so I'm going to jump back into slides for a little while. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the journey of Cloud so far, because Cloud is it's not even a year to the point that we broke ground on Cloud. So I want to talk about what that journey looked like a little bit. I thought it might be interesting for you to hear how we actually built it, some of the decisions that we made along the way, some of the interesting architectural patterns that we decided to take on. So I think Taylor already hinted at this or mentioned this story at Laracon US last year. But the journey sort of, in some respects, began back at Laracon EU in Amsterdam in 2024, where we sat down with a burger and many Coke Zeros. And we asked ourselves the question, what would be acceptable for a deployment time if we were to build a fully managed platform? And the number that we came up with was 1 minute or less. Now, I've probably already spoiled the combination of this story, but bear with me for a little bit longer. So we thought that became our North Star, in all honesty. If we could deploy a typical Laravel application in 1 minute or less, that would be incredible for us. And so we started in March of 2024. Laracon was in, I think, either the end of January or beginning of February. And in March, we broke ground on Cloud. And at that point, there was just 3 people. There was myself. We brought in Chris Vidal. Oh, I've typoed his name. Apologies, Chris. Who you may more commonly know as Fideloper, and Nuno Maduro. And we kind of set some of the foundations in place for what was to come. So it was the 3 of us for a good while. And then in May 2024, we brought in 2 more people onto the team. So we brought Calvin Szymanski, who is our product manager. and Justin Reasoner, who joined Chris on the infrastructure team. And together with Chris and Justin on the infrastructure team, they really laid a lot of the foundations to get us to where we are today. Not long after that, Florian Beer also joined the team. He, I think, was actually hired at the exact same time as Justin, but because of previous commitments, he took a month longer to join the team. So he also slotted in beautifully into the infrastructure team. We brought in our head of design, David Hill, to help us actually build out the UI, because at this point we didn't really have any UI. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we did through those early stages in just a little bit. But David came in and really hit the ground running in building out the UI that we have today. And Mohammed joined the team. So he was working at Laravel in a customer success capacity, and he joined the cloud team around about June of 2024. Then in July of 2024, we realized that we needed somebody who could take those incredible designs that David was making and actually bring them and turn them into some UI. And so who better to do that than Jason Beggs? So Jason Beggs joined the team in July of 2024 in the build up to Laracon US, which was in August 2024. And this was the first time that we really kind of proved the concept that cloud would work end to end. We had, really bullish that the approaches that we were taking were going to work. And just in the lead up to Laracon US was the time that we actually proved the concept of connecting a GitHub repo, having that application build and deploy that application somewhere so that it could be viewed by users. And this was the point that Taylor took the stage and announced Laravel Cloud to the world. Nobody knew what cloud was at this point. And this image that you can see here is us all sat, almost the entire cloud team at this point, all sat with laptops open while Taylor was about to join the stage, just to make sure that things were behaving as we hoped they would during that first initial demo. And if you cast your minds back, I think everything went pretty well. Okay, so moving on past Laracon US into September of 2024, two new members joined the team. So we brought in Jeremy. He was actually working on Nova at the time, and his initial role when joining Cloud was to build out our back office system. So everything that we needed in place to for our support staff to be able to help customers in the way that they needed. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. So that was Jeremy's first project. And then after that, he joined the cloud app team. And so works now across both of those disciplines. And Dries had been working on and off a little bit on cloud up to this point. But after Laracon, he became, he kind of moved away from his open source responsibilities. And he is now our billing guru on Laravel Cloud. So he's responsible for the way that we capture the billing events that we need to charge customers for, and everything through to charging those customers as well. And then up until this point, these were have been the last two people to join the team, and that was in October of 2024. So we balanced out the infrastructure teams and the app team by adding Sylvester Damgard to the team. And David, at this point, in terms of design, has been working, as you can tell, over the last couple of days, has been working across all of the products and the open source tooling within Laravel from a design perspective. And so we needed somebody to come in and kind of take more of a full-time role on cloud, solely on cloud. And so Hugo joined the team in October as well. And so that's, to this point, the size of the team who've worked on cloud over the last 12 months. I think we sit at about 12 team members at this point. We're looking to bring in, actually, I think 3 or 4 more at the moment. So probably 2 app developers and 2 infrastructure developers. So if anybody is on the lookout, then let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so that's kind of hiring journey. Then November 2024 came. So after Laracon US, we continued working on the product, making it more resilient, adding new features to it, building out the UI that was missing at the time. And so that we could get to this point in November 2024 where we could actually onboard some what we called early access customers. And we recruited these early access customers from our waitlist. We sent out a survey to the waitlist and really looked for potential customers of cloud who fit the feature set that we had available to us at that time. And so we ramped up that early access phase. It was a pretty slow ramp up through November, and then into December, I think up until the point that we launched yesterday, I think we were running about 300 customers who were testing cloud for us at that point. And that brings us back to February 2024, and it also brings us back to Amsterdam, where we ate more burgers, we drank more Coke Zero, and just about over half the team joined us in Amsterdam, where we worked in the build up to Laracon EU as a team. We all got together, worked in the same room, which we very rarely do because, as I'm sure most of you know, we are a pretty much fully remote team. And so we worked to put some extra polish on cloud as a team in the lead up to Laracon EU, so that Taylor could then go up on stage and announce that we would be launching Laravel Cloud 2 weeks from Laracon EU. And sorry for the terrible photo here. I was supposed to swap this one out beforehand, but this is again another backstage view of everybody making sure that everything was running smoothly again while Taylor was on stage. So that brings us just about back to where we are now. And I want to go back to the 1 minute or less question that we posed at the very beginning of this section of the talk. Did we make it? Well, like I said, spoiler alert, I already showed you that we can now deploy in around about 25 seconds. But just to prove it, and just to prove that that wasn't me faking it somehow in the background, this was a real tweet from yesterday where somebody was able to build and deploy on Laravel Cloud in exactly 25 seconds. So I'm pretty proud that we managed to achieve that. We managed to kind of half the time that we thought that we might be able to achieve. And I think you'll find be hard pressed to find a faster way to deploy your Laravel applications. Cosmic salute for good measure. Okay. So that's kind of the journey as to where we got to, where we've got to and how we got there. Now I just want to give you a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain about some of the things some of the decisions that we made, how some of the things work, picked out from a couple of the tweets that we've made over the last few weeks. A few questions came up that I found kind of interesting. So I'm going to try and answer some of those with a couple of code samples. So yeah, let's crack on. Let's start talking a little bit about Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is the technology that powers the infrastructure side of Laravel Cloud. I like to refer to it as the engine room. And this was one of the kind of the first and the biggest decisions that we made when building cloud. We have in-house already a lot of good knowledge, of a huge breadth of knowledge about provisioning infrastructure and optimizing that infrastructure like for Laravel applications, including things like zero downtime deployments. But doing it on our own infrastructure was a bit of a different beast. And that's where Kubernetes came in. We flip-flopped around a few different ideas, but this was the one that we really felt would give us the scalability and the automation and the isolation that we would need in order to build a platform like Laravel Cloud. It's self-healing in the event of any issues, and it affords us the ability for customers, like I showed you, to switch out things like your Node or PHP versions with just a simple configuration change. Now, obviously, Kubernetes is incredibly powerful, but we have had to build a whole lot of stuff on top of Kubernetes to make this work in the way that we wanted to. And I want to just walk through a diagram about what actually happens when you click that deploy button in the cloud UI. And this is a very, very simplified version of what happens. But up here, you can see somebody on their laptop, and they're going to go ahead and click the blue deploy button from inside the cloud UI. That's going to make a request to the cloud app. And the cloud app is obviously going to do its thing. It's going to do all the validation. It's going to make sure that that request is good and that that customer is allowed to deploy that application. And assuming all of those things work out, we push a job onto our build queue. And what we have first is our first Kubernetes cluster here. This is what we call our build cluster. And the build cluster is going to pick up that job from the queue. And it's going to know that it then has a job to do. And the first thing it's going to want to know is what the details are of that job that it needs to process. I actually missed an arrow off here, but the build cluster now makes an API call to the cloud app, with the identifier, or with an identifier to the application that's being deployed, and it gets a whole bunch of details about that application, which it then uses to build the Docker image that I talked about before. So this will take all of the configuration options that you've applied in the Cloud UI, and it will use that to build that Docker image. And eventually, actually not eventually, as you've seen, it's pretty fast, it will build that application and store it in a registry. And once that process is completed, it pushes a job back onto the build queue, which the Cloud application then picks up and says, okay, that build is complete. I now need to deploy it. And so the build and the deployment are two separate processes. The Cloud app will then ensure that everything went okay with that build. And assuming that it did, it will put a job on the deployment queue with an identifier for the application that's being deployed. Now, this time our compute cluster has an operator listening on here for those jobs, for jobs appearing on that queue. And almost the exact same thing happens. It will take that job and it will make another API call to the Cloud app for, again, all of the details about that application. And then it will turn that into a custom resource in Kubernetes and apply that using the Kubernetes API to then deploy that application. And that all happens in a zero downtime way as well. So what actually happens is it creates what are called pods within Kubernetes, and it will spin up the new pods while the current pods that are serving the application traffic are still living. And the new application, the new version of the application will spin up on those new pods. And as soon as they become healthy and we're aware that they can accept HTTP traffic, we then switch over, or Kubernetes, I should say, switches over traffic to route it to the new running pods. And if there's any processes running on the old pods, we have a graceful shutdown time that you can set, which will allow those jobs to drain down before those pods are taken out of service completely. So I'm sure you can appreciate there's a whole lot more than that happening under the hood, but I wanted to give a brief overview of the power of the infrastructure running under the hood of Laravel Cloud. Okay, so another big decision that we made fairly early on was which stack we wanted to use. And we discussed this at great length because obviously this is quite a key decision to make at the beginning of any project. It's one that's difficult to back out from if you get too far down the road and it turns out to be the wrong choice. And one of the key decisions was that we know that at some stage, we have a very good idea that at some stage we're going to want to build an API. So was it the right choice to build an API and a separate single page application, or was it the right choice to do some sort of full stack like React and Inertia, or Vue and Inertia, or Livewire, one of those approaches? And ultimately, we knew that we would need to progress this project pretty quickly to hit our ambitious targets. And so we decided that we wanted to, even though we know that we want to build this API at some stage, we wanted to be able to move quickly. And the quickest way for us to move was to have our front and our back ends close together. And so the decision then became which of those stacks to use. And I think it really just came down to the fact that we felt at the time that the richest ecosystem of components that were available to us were with the React stack. And that was just UI components, because if you remember at the time when we first started this project, we had no design. So we were just scaffolding and templating out the application. And we felt like the React with Shadcn and the Radix components had the best breadth of components to allow us to build that out without having to reach for other sets of components and kind of piecemeal things together. And that's really all it came down to. And I think it's turned out to be a really good choice. I think even it was a good choice even at the beginning, but with the improvements that we'd seen to Inertia in version 2, it's really vindicated that choice further. And we'll talk a little bit more about the API and how we're going to tackle that in a little bit later on. Okay, so one of the questions that came up was, were there any interesting design patterns that we used along the way? And so I've pulled out a couple that I think are quite interesting. The first one being fakes, which are a real nice way for us to streamline local development. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that when you're working on a product like Cloud, we're dealing with a lot of different services. We're making calls out to lots of different APIs on a regular basis, and we don't want to be doing those in our local development environment. And there's a few different ways that you can approach this, but the pattern that we've landed on, which we really like to use, is the pattern of fakes. And what we do here is we bind a interface to the container, and we decide which implementation of that interface we want to bind by checking for the string that we have in our configuration. So if the configuration has a string called fake, we will inject the fake domain provider. And if we have a real API key, we're going to do the real implementation of that provider. And so by default in our example environment files, everything is set to fake. As soon as somebody new joins the project and starts working on it, they copy their example environment file across to their production environment file, and everything just works. Now, I'd say everything just works. There's a lot of work that's actually involved to maintain these fakes. So when you're talking about, I don't know, faking a deployment, for instance, we actually have things that will simulate deployments running, where we pause for periods of time while we wait for new events to come through, or we're taking, we have stubbed out real deployment logs that will come and appear in real time. So if you're actually to work locally without wanting any dependency on any other service, you can actually simulate something that works pretty close to what we would see in the real world. And each one of our fakes uses the fakeable trait. And the nice thing about this is that it checks if we're running in unit tests. And if we are, it allows us to return a partial mock, essentially. So in a unit test, we can just call fake domain provider. In this case, it's the same one that I talked about in the previous slide. We can make an instance of that, and then we can perform assertions on it. So in this case, we'll have run a test, and at the very end of that test, we want to make sure that this method wasn't called. And we can do that, but the rest of the test will use the full fake. So this is a pattern that we kind of experimented with from a very early part of the project, and we really liked it. So anytime we're now working with something that interfaces with some third-party service, or any service that we maintain internally that we don't want to be calling on a regular basis or for real on local development, then we reach for this pattern. And so far, it's worked really, really nicely. So I wanted to call that one out. Okay. So the next one I wanted to talk about is actions. And this is another pattern that we lean on pretty heavily. And the main reason for this, if you're not aware of what actions are, they allow you to they provide a way for you to encapsulate small pieces of logic that can be reused in other locations. So in our scenario, if we're, for instance, adding a custom domain to an application, this would be encapsulated within an action. And the reason we like actions is because it keeps our controllers really, really slim. That's one side of things. But if you remember from a couple of slides ago, I mentioned that we have goals or ambitions to build an API at some stage later down the road. The action pattern is really nice for this because all of that logic already exists. And so when we're building our endpoints, we can literally reach for those actions that already exist. And we know with some confidence that those are going to work and perform the things that we need them to do when we need them to do them. And this was kind of one of the, when we made that decision whether to use like a full stack approach like React and Inertia, or whether we wanted to do an API and a separate SPA, this was one of the factors in that decision. We wanted to make sure that all of that logic was encapsulated, so we didn't basically end up building a whole bunch of duplicated controllers. We're palming that logic off into actions, which we can reuse again and again. And they look a little bit like this. I'm following the same pattern that we saw previously, injecting the domain provider here. So as you can probably guess from this point, when we inject this domain provider, Laravel's going to go ahead and resolve that from the container for us. And so if we're working locally, we're going to get the fake implementation of domain provider. But if we have a real API key in there, we're going to use the real version of domain provider. And so all these actions just work using dependency injection. And then we have, typically actions are pretty small. They're performing one really small piece of activity or one really small piece of logic. And here you can see we receive an environment and we add the cloud domain with the origin to that environment. So that's all that action is responsible for doing. So you can see these patterns that we've chosen are kind of all touching on each other and complementing each other to allow us to build this like really nice set of rules around our code base that are going to make it really easy for when we bring new members to the team. Okay, so one that's maybe a little bit out of left field. We obviously, I'm sure it's not a surprise to people that we use things like Pint, to tools like Pint that are in, tools that are provided by Laravel to make sure that our code remains consistent. We're using Pest for tests. This is stuff that I'm not sure would be a surprise for people. But one thing that I think you might find surprising is that we make quite very heavy usage of coverage in our tests. And I think a lot of times people think that coverage is a vanity metric. And I think in some cases it can be. But I can think of more times that coverage has got me out of jail when I've pushed a pull request than it's caused me an annoyance when I've had to actually test that thing. Because we have rules in place that say our coverage can't drop below a certain limit. And so when that test fails, I know immediately that I've got to go and check that I haven't missed an edge case somewhere, or, maybe it's something that I don't need to cover. But a lot of times there has been something that I've missed, and coverage has really had my back from that perspective. So I think broadly, it's a really nice way to see how, obviously, the clues in the title, how well covered your code base is of tests. But more than that, I think it's a safety net that you can actually push a pull request and make sure that you have tested everything that needs to be tested. Just by that coverage number dropping gives you that indication that you should go and check that you haven't missed something. And I personally, that's a surprise to me because I wasn't a big fan of coverage before working on this project. And now I'm a big fan. Okay. The next one I wanted to touch on was something that we thought about pretty early on was that when we launch cloud, we would need some tools in place that would allow our customer support team to serve our customers and help resolve their issues. And so we spent a good deal of time figuring out what that should look like, what tools we should use. And we ended up building this customer support tooling using Nova. And so we did this well ahead of time. So basically, every time we ship a new feature or add a new entity to our database, part of that workflow is to make sure that that thing also exists in Nova. So the customer support team, anytime we add a new feature, it's going to be there for them to interface with and interact with and make sure that they have all the information that they need. I think this has been really, really invaluable. It's launching this week. We've had the customer support team onboarded here. And I think it's been really helpful to make sure that they had all of that stuff ahead of time and that we weren't kind of fighting against that at the point that we were trying to launch cloud. So just wanted to call that out as something that I thought was valuable if you're building a product like this, that thinking ahead on things like this are really, really important. What we also did with the back office system is link out to some of our other services. So I'm sure you can imagine that with the infrastructure that we're running, we have a lot of observability tools to make sure that things are running as they should be. Now, the nice thing is that we can pair those tools together. So we can say from Nova, we're going to link out to our observability tool into the exact place so that we can get an overview of any given application to see how it's performing. So yeah, I guess I'm calling out here that I think it's important to think about these things ahead of time, but also thinking outside the box about how you can make that tool more useful for your team. Okay. So I mentioned that I tweeted last week to ask if anybody had any questions in advance of this talk. And I had a few takers, so I'm going to try and answer some of those now. So the first one was Dwight asking or saying that he's curious if cloud will support hosting Reverb instances. I think there's a very good chance that we add Reverb support to cloud in the coming months. Obviously, Reverb is a project that's pretty close to my heart, so I will, for one, be rooting for it. But yeah, I think it's question has come up a lot, and I think it's something that we will end up supporting as kind of a first-party offering for cloud. I think there's a second question here as well. I think I probably covered this as well in the overview that I went through on Kubernetes, where what happens to the old instances when a deployment happens. Yeah, you get a whole new set of pods that will take over from the old deployment, and the new deployment will be on a new pod. So that does mean that storage on cloud is ephemeral. So if you are looking to do things like, or need to persist your things in storage for a longer time, then you'll want to look at things like our object storage integration to persist those things. I think that's the same question I answered again, or just previously. Okay, one from our very own David Hill. Who's your favorite person to work with on the cloud team? Well, I don't think it would be fair to answer that on the stream, but what I will do for you, David, if you're listening, is tell you who my favorite person isn't on the team. Or no, oh, I got that wrong. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a clue who my favorite person on the team. And that clue is their first name doesn't start and end with the same letter. I'll let you think on that one for a minute. Are we using Breeze or custom-built Cloud Auth? We are actually using Fortify, and we've hand-rolled the front end for authentication. And how do we manage permissions? Well, right now we have 2 roles in cloud. You can be an admin or a developer. And so the permissions are not all that different. And so this is a fairly simple implementation at the moment, but we will still be adding we will soon be adding more fine-grained permissions. And so I'll report back as and when we've done that implementation. Okay. This is a great question. So you ended up with some great people, but have there been any struggles with expanding the team relatively quickly? I think the way that we've built the team, in that we've combined some of the folks that were already at Laravel whilst hiring for some new positions, I think has worked out really well. And the type of people that we've hired have all been pretty senior and self-starting individuals, which I think was really important for the stage of the project that we at. We wanted people who were able to come in and really hit the ground running, and I think we achieved that really well. We also think we found people that kind of have I would call it like the Laravel vibe, and I think the whole team has gelled really well. So I think in terms of finding the right people, growing the team, and growing a team that is working well together, I think that's been actually as good as could be expected, if not better. I think I would say one of the hardest challenges with hiring is knowing what the right time to hire is, because you don't necessarily know that you're going to need that person until that point comes that you know that you need them. And then you've got to go through the whole hiring process, and then there's people's notice periods and stuff to deal with. So that's probably been the biggest challenge. But in terms of actually growing the team and gelling the team together, I think we've done a pretty good job so far. Okay, and last one from Adrian. What's 4-pronged attack on this question? So the most challenging feature of cloud, I think to date, at least from the aspect of what I've been closest to working on, has probably been billing. Just through the nature of managing all of the infrastructure and having to collect different pieces of billing information from various different areas and collating that all together to kind of produce one final invoice has been something that's been challenging. And you can't oftentimes build the billing side of things until you've actually done the implementation of the thing that you need to bill for. So billing oftentimes has come as the last piece of the puzzle. And so it's felt a little bit like we've been playing catch up the whole time. Worst feature to implement was probably custom domains, because there are a whole lot of edge cases to deal with. And we've used, I'm sure all of us have used a lot of different ways of interacting with domains in different products that we've used over the years. And it's hit and miss, that experience. And we really wanted to craft something that was good for our customers. And I think we have landed on something really good, but it took a long time and was very difficult to implement. things I learned. I mean, I think I'm learning still every day. I didn't know really anything about Kubernetes before we started the project. I haven't been too involved. I was involved a little bit in Kubernetes at the beginning. I even bought a Kubernetes book and read that. So I'm like well versed on it now. So yeah, that's one big thing that I learned along the way. And yeah, just I think every day I'm just learning new things. And then finally, stuff that wasn't in the framework before Cloud needed. And I could only think of two things. I think we added an additional logger, which would allow us to kind of stream logs from all of our pods into one location so that we could read them out into the logging that you see inside Cloud. And the other nice feature that I think we added was on-the-fly file system. So when you add a file system to Cloud, like an object storage file system, you can add multiple of those. And so the way that you saw me do databases was to, the way that when I connected the database to the environment, you saw that we injected the environment in variables. We wanted people to be able to have more than one file system connected at any given time. And so, but we only could confidently know what one set of those environment variables should be. So Taylor actually came up with a really nice solution to kind of build those file systems on the fly by building up a JSON object. So if you're interested to see what that looks like, then add a couple of object storage buckets to your environment and go and sniff through those injected environment variables, and you can see how all that is configured. All right, that's it from me. I just wanted to end up by saying yesterday we shipped and now we keep on shipping. So if you're interested in checking out Cloud, you can go ahead and hopefully I've put the right one there, but scan that QR code or visit cloud.laravel.com. I'm hosting an AMA on Reddit on Thursday. So the link again is there. If you're interested and you have more questions in follow up to this presentation, then feel free. And if you would prefer to direct questions at me directly, then I am @_Joe Dixon on Twitter. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk. Yeah, hand back to.
All right. Thank you, Joe. It was information packed. It was excellent. Very much enjoyed that. And actually, we have a very active chat. So hopefully, do you have a moment for a few questions from the chat?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm going to limit myself to one question right now, and then we'll go through that because there's a bunch in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. But there was a spot there towards the start, Joe, when you were in the dashboard for Laravel Cloud, and you were setting up. You were showing how you can set up like a cluster, and then there was a spot where you're choosing your database, and there was an option to choose how many compute units you want. I at first was like, how do I know how much I need? Do you have any like guidance for like how to determine, you know, how many compute units you need, how much resourcing you might need, or over time if you need to increase your resourcing?
Yeah, I mean, the size that I selected was pretty small. So if you're running like a hobby project, I would probably stick between those the quarter compute unit and half compute unit levels. Then it's going to probably vary a little bit on the kind of application and the amount of traffic that you're handling and how many kind of writes you're doing to your database. I would probably recommend like shooting quite high because the database is auto scale anyway. You're not going to be paying unless you need that extra capacity. So I would probably like over provision on that a little bit and then monitor how it's performing and drop that down as you need if you want the safety net in place that you can't, you know, let your database scale more than you necessarily want it to.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because I think that's certainly for me is going to be, you know, one thing kind of wrapping my head around a little bit of like the variable pricing and how to kind of keep a tab on that and make sure I don't spend too much, but also make sure that I've given the application the resources it needs. Right. So cool.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's bang through some questions here. This I think was one of the first ones. It just sort of like maybe a concept question. I think you kind of talked to this right at the beginning, but how does, if you could sum it up again, how does Laravel Cloud compare with Laravel Forge? What are the key differences?
Yeah, so I think with Laravel Forge, you are bringing your own cloud essentially. So Forge integrates with DigitalOcean, AWS, Volta, all those server providers. You need to bring your own account in order to do that, whereas Cloud manages all that infrastructure for you. Cloud will also manage things like auto scaling, which I talked about. So if you have spiky traffic or you just want to provision your infrastructure in a way that you know on a, you know, something happens to your application on a Saturday afternoon, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to go ahead. And if you say, I want to scale between 1 and 5 replicas, Cloud will automatically scale up as more traffic hits your application. So those are like some of the main differences. I think the server provider thing is not something you deal with Cloud. We manage all that infrastructure for you. We manage all the auto scaling, all of the security, all the kind of one-click upgrades for things, which I talked about. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. Like you with Forge, you've got Forge and you've got DigitalOcean or Forge and AWS, and you're bouncing between these two services. Whereas Cloud, kind of both of those things are now kind of in one platform. You can kind of think of it that way a little bit. And I think this, like, kind of connecting to that, I don't know if I see the question here, but I saw someone had a question about, like, can I SSH to the server, right? And I think we're used to, like, being able to do that with, like, a DigitalOcean environment, right? And then someone also had, here's a question here kind of connected to that. What if I need to run an interactive command like PHP artisan make filament user? So if you have people asking those questions about how can I SSH to the box and do things, what would you say to those people?
Yeah, so these are things that we're going to... now that Cloud has launched, these will be things that we decide whether we think they're features that we need or not. Interactive commands is interesting, and I think that's definitely something that we will explore because you're not always in a position where you can default those values or whatnot. So I think that's something that we'll consider. SSH is interesting to me because we've talked about this quite a lot internally. And just because of the nature of Kubernetes being the way that it works under the hood is that your pod can move around from time to time. So you could be in a position where you're like SSH into it, and that's totally feasible, but that pod could get moved, and in which case you would lose your connection, or you trigger a deployment and you would lose that connection. And if you're like doing things like wanting to add, I don't know, files to that server, then you're going to lose those anyway. So I'm unsure like if SSH is as beneficial in a platform like Cloud, but I'm definitely curious to hear people's opinions on that.
Yeah, I think it sometimes comes down to use cases, and I think I've experienced this many times. You change to some new platform, you think I need to be able to do that, and it's like, no, you just need to be able to accomplish this thing. Maybe there's a different way to do it in the Laravel Cloud environment, right?
Yeah, I mean the interactive command is a perfect example, right? Because you would want to SSH in to run that. Yes. And if that's doing things like adding records to your database, then that's absolutely fine. But if that's like, doing stuff like creating files on your file system, it's probably not worthwhile. But if we could solve that problem by making interactive commands available in the UI, then maybe SSH isn't needed. But I'm sure there will always be use cases where it is relevant and people will need to use it. So yeah, definitely curious to hear more real world examples of that.
Yeah, cool. Another question that we have here from Diego. So is there a way to have multi-tenant app on Laravel Cloud where my customers will be able to connect their own domain to my app?
It's possible. But so right now, the way that it stands, it's probably not going to be easy to do a multi-tenanted app where you actually offer like pure custom domains. If you're doing, we have like wildcard domain support. So if you were doing a wildcard of your own domain that you would give to your customers, which is fairly common. So, I don't know, I guess our vanity, our cloud domains are a good example of that. So you could create like joe.laravel.cloud. You could have customer.example.com, and you could serve all of those from one application. Adding true custom domains for customers is a little more tricky, but something we could definitely have a conversation about. So reach out and we can maybe talk a little bit more about your use case.
Cool, thank you. And also kudos to Florian answering a lot of the questions in the chat. I know there's a lot of questions of like, what about this, what about that? So thanks and kudos to Florian. Another one related to just future plans. Ronnie had a question about, were there any plans to publish and document the API?
It's on the roadmap. So we definitely are aware that we need a public-facing API. I don't have a date as to when we're going to build that or launch that yet, and what exactly that looks like. But yeah, I'm very confident that there will be an API at some point.
I saw this question. There was a few kind of different versions of it, and they all centered around sort of database access and connection to a database. So this one from Mac says, how can I access my database? Sometimes things go wrong, and the only way to identify it is by analyzing data in the database. Sometimes I need to download it for local proper analysis. So what would you say to access to the database? And then we also kind of connected that we had some questions about, can I connect to a database that's outside of Laravel Cloud? I just kind of bring my own and put my own credentials in.
Cool. So yeah, there's a few parts to that. So the first one is with the Postgres, the serverless Postgres databases that we offer. They are publicly accessible. So the connection string that you see in the UI is accessible, that you could plug that straight in. In fact, we even have a deep link tool in Cloud that allows you to press the button, and if you're using something like Table Plus, it will automatically configure the connection for you, and you can just access it. MySQL databases, the ones that I showed you in developer preview at the moment, they are private by default, but we have a toggle in the UI that allows you to make them public. And essentially what happens is you get a separate connection endpoint, publicly accessible endpoint. And so the idea here is that you would use that in the same way you could connect to Table Plus, and you could have a dump of your old database that you could then restore in Table Plus or whatever, or just go and fix that problem that you need to do. But then you can shut public access off to that immediately afterwards. So if you don't want if you don't want the extra security risk of having that database publicly available, you can make that private only. Can you bring your own databases? Absolutely, yes. But in the same way as the serverless Postgres, they would need to be publicly accessible. If you have a private database, this is something that we will definitely be looking into moving forward, but right now you wouldn't be able to connect to that.
Okay, yeah, I think.
Did that cover all of them?
I think so. Yeah, I was just looking through. People were asking about remote connections as well as what was available. You talked about. So I did see. I don't know if it's new. Someone had asked about SQLite, but I think you kind of answered that. Like if you're using a service like Terso or something like that, you could bring your own SQLite. In the future, is there any plans to support things beyond MySQL and Postgres in Laravel Cloud?
Nothing like concrete plan. There will be different flavors likely of Postgres and MySQL, but those are probably the two major ones. If we venture down the road at some point of allowing people or customers to attach persistent volumes to their applications, then there's the potential for SQLite, I guess, but that's not something that's like on the roadmap right now.
Cool. Joe, we do have a number of other questions. I'm just curious for time. I guess if we were to ask like 5 more questions, do you have time for that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So Chris Smith has a question. How much to support C on my cloud instance?
How much to support C on your cloud instance? So support would be able to see things like the name of your application, but not any details, like can't access any details of your application at all. So source code or anything like that. There would just be the stuff that you put into the cloud UI, basically to the metadata around that makes it possible for us to deploy those applications and then debug them so we can find them, or sorry, not debug them, but to find them in the Nova interface so that we can help. Yeah. I think, does that answer the question? I think
so.
I think fluffed around it a little bit, but yeah, we can't see anything sensitive, I guess, is the sentiment I'm trying to get across.
Perfect. Another question we got here. Sorry, I'm trying to. Dan, if you have another one lined up. Doing this live.
This is, here we go. Can echo. Rumors say that it's faster to deploy an app using Laravel Cloud during a flight. Can Joe confirm?
I don't know. There's something internally at Laravel that if you are on a long haul flight, that you just everybody seems to have this ability to get plugged in and just do insane amounts of shipping on a flight with no Wi-Fi access. But I don't remember who it was, but somebody did actually deploy a cloud application on their flight, and I don't know if it was faster, but I guess maybe they were closer to the cloud, so maybe
to the cloud from the clouds. That's great. Actually, this is a good one here too. Ryan says, any chance to get the ability to automatically create an environment from a PR for PR?
That's on the roadmap too. So this will be a feature that we work on at some stage. Oh, he's put it exactly in there. So preview deployments is something that we will definitely be working on.
And I think that's too. We talked about this with Taylor when he was on back in December. Like that could be a consideration for people that like maybe initially you don't use cloud for production, but like for that preview environment feature alone, that could be really valuable for your development, right? You have a QA team, you have other people you want to send a link to. It's just going to take so much of that hassle out of trying to share an environment and get it provisioned, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely it's a huge time saver. Like people build this type of functionality themselves, and so if you can just plug this directly into cloud, and you have a rule set that says if it's a PR with this title, then I don't know, provision this type of environment with this type of database, and it just works. And then 30 seconds later, you have an active environment. I think that's invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely been on some projects where there's been some hand-rolled solutions. So one less thing you need to maintain is always nice, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question here for you. Is it possible to have a static IP address /pool so my app can be whitelisted to other services like SendGrid?
I don't believe that's possible right now, no.
Cool.
That question has come up, so we'll definitely talk about that internally and see if there's anything we can do.
Okay.
Let's do 2 more questions. We have a question here about payment. I don't know if you can speak to this, Joe, but can we pay with the credit card right now? Will there be any other payment options available in the future that you know of?
Yes, we're talking about things like Apple Pay and Google Pay.
Maybe PayPal, perhaps.
PayPal, maybe, yeah. And I mean, no plans right now, but if this is something that becomes a big deal for people, then I'm sure that we can explore that.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I think it's a couple of times you've mentioned, reach out if this is a need of use. So I feel like the Laravel Cloud team is very open to suggestions from the community if there's things the community wants and feels that they could benefit from.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear from you. The more feedback we can get, the better.
Awesome. All right, one more question. You got one there, Margaret?
I do. Are there any plans to allow multiple apps on a single cluster, similar for sites, or would you say compute is cheap enough to have an app per cluster?
There are no plans to allow, again, something that came up internally, but right now I don't think there are plans to add multiple apps per cluster. I think with the hibernation tools and stuff that we have available, if the concern is for like dev environments and stuff, then I kind of feel like we have that covered, because you just hibernate your application when you don't need it and you keep your costs down that way.
Cool.
Right. Cool.
All right. Yeah, we had
a
number of other questions as well. So anyone else has asked questions, what we could do is we could also forward them to Laravel team, and I'm sure they'll have all these questions available, and we can maybe put them in the description as well. But for the sake of time, I know we're running a little bit over, but it's totally cool. Just want to say thank you so much, Joe. I'll pass it off to you, Dan, if you want to do the final closing notes as well.
Yeah. We if I can just jump in, we have the AMA on Thursday as well, so they can always fire off questions on that, and I'm happy to answer them then.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think Joe had shared a QR code of that AMA. We'll make sure we get that link and drop it in the description on the video on YouTube as well. So yeah, I'd like to second what Margaret said. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a terribly busy, probably number of months, but especially the last couple of weeks, especially this week. You're probably running short on sleep. I know it's getting late in the day for you. So thank you so much for joining us, sharing your insight. Like, we had so much engagement in the chat and in viewership. Definitely a lot of people very excited about Laravel Cloud. And thank you to you and the Laravel team for bringing it together, and looking forward to what's to come.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Cool.
Thanks
Awesome.
so much.
Thanks, Joe. All right. And there we have it. So yeah, before we sign off for the week, for the month, just got a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. So I'll hand it over to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Dan. So for our next meetup, you can join us on March 25th. So again, the last Tuesday of every month is when we're aiming to host this meetup. So stay tuned for that. And then if you haven't already, please sign up for our giveaway. It's open now until March 4th. So this is one of 2 JetBrains IDE subscription codes for an entire year. So you don't want to miss out on that. And how to stay connected and involved, make sure to follow us on X at Laravel WW Meetup. And for all your Laravel WW Meetup updates, you can check us out there. We definitely want to hear if anybody has any topics or suggestions or speakers you want to hear from. We'd love to communicate with you on there. And then again, you can find this video. We record them live all the time, but you can watch these videos over and over again at your speed, whatever you'd like to do, on the Laravel YouTube channel. So make sure to subscribe, hit that bell, and you'll be able to see all that. And make sure to hit up the meetup.laravel.com website to get notifications, get that email once a month to make sure that you don't miss a meetup.
Also a great place if you're ever interested in doing a talk on the Laravel Worldwide Meetup. There's a place there you can submit your talk idea.
Yeah. And again, our YouTube. So please check us out. A lot of other wonderful Laravel videos. There's lots of videos coming out all the time. Check it out every single day. And you could subscribe and hit that notification bell to not miss a single one.
And there we have it. Once again, like to thank Joe and the entire Laravel team for the launch of Laravel Cloud. I think there's a lot of people very excited, very much a big milestone, but also very much just the beginning. So looking forward, like I said, to what's to come. Any last words for you, Margaret, before we sign off for the month?
Just thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this meetup, and we look forward to seeing you next month. So thanks for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in March. Take care, everybody.